The stylus would not close the field. I pressed it a fourth time against the registry slate, and a fourth time the cursor for Sol-designated space sat there blinking, refusing the rating I had already typed. Threat tier, unresolved. Not blank because no one had looked, blank because the field would not take an answer. I am Joran Vask, third-year cadet of the Alnori clerkry, seconded 11 days prior to the Calyx Index Spire's boundary audit, the registry that rates every spacefaring species in known space on a tier scale from negligible to existential, so that fleets crossing unfamiliar borders know, before they arrive, what they are walking into. 11,400 entries, everyone resolved but this one. I checked the annotation field, expecting my own half-finished notes. Instead, I found 4 words in a hand that wasn't mine, dated 9 years before my posting. Do not force this field. No author logged, no clerk ID attached, just the warning sitting under my own incomplete work like something left for me specifically. I should have closed the terminal and reported the anomaly through proper channels. Instead, I pulled the audit trail, every clerk who had touched the Sol entry since the index opened a file on it at all. 41 names across 200 years. Reassigned, the log said, for 38 of them. Transferred to non-boundary postings within a season of touching the file. The other 3 had no exit record, just a stop date and nothing after. I told myself that was clerical attrition. Boundary audit was unglamorous work. People rotated out of it constantly. I kept reading anyway. The data behind the blank field wasn't absent. That was the part that should have warned me off sooner. There were 41 survey packets attached, everyone logged as incomplete, source interference. Ships had been sent over 2 centuries to gather rateable threat data near the human boundary, the way the index gathers it on everyone: close approach, passive scan, withdrawal before contact. Standard procedure. It had worked on 11,000 other species. Packet 1. A Henar light cruiser, 3 sensor passes, then a 4th pass that returned no telemetry and a crew roster logged as recovered intact 11 days later, drifting at the edge of the survey zone, every instrument wiped clean, and every crew member unable to say where the missing days had gone. Packet 6. A joint Aztec-Calyx probe that transmitted flawless data for 6 hours and then, in its 7th hour, began transmitting the same 6 hours again. And again. Looped, not lost. Someone, the report's annotation read, had handed it back exactly what it asked for twice. Packet 19 made me stop scrolling and read it twice. A Dorith listening post, unmanned, designed to do nothing but record passive emissions for a standard year and report home. It recorded for the full year. On the day it was scheduled to transmit its findings, the file it sent back was not its own. It was the index's own internal threat scale documentation, the working draft, annotated in places the listening post had no clearance to have ever seen, corrections in the margins, polite and precise, on 3 of the scale's oldest assumptions. The post itself was never recovered. The corrections, when a senior analyst finally checked them 80 years later, were accurate. Packet 33, nothing technical at all. A note, handwritten by a clerk 2 generations before me, stapled to an otherwise empty survey result. It read, "I do not think they are hiding the information from us. I think the information does not become information until it reaches them, and by then it isn't ours to file. I requested transfer the same week I wrote this. I recommend my successor do the same, sooner than I did." I went to my floor supervisor with the pattern laid out, 41 incidents, the same shape, the same outcome, never violence, never even contact, just data refused and return changed. Senior Clerk Myra Dasendry read 4 lines of my summary and told me to close the file and request reassignment to interior audits before the week was out. I asked her why no one had simply marked the species unrateable and moved on, the way the index handled the handful of pre-contact cultures too primitive to assess. "Because unrateable means we don't have enough information," she said. "This isn't that. We have plenty of information. None of it will sit still long enough to become a rating. She looked at me the way you look at someone standing too close to a ledge. The field doesn't resist being filled, Vask. It resists existing as a field at all. Those aren't the same problem, and only one of them has a procedure. Then what do I write? You write the smallest true thing the form will accept, and you stop asking it questions it was never built to answer. She slid my own summary back across the desk, unread past the fourth line. I had this same file in my second year. None of us solved it. We just learned where the edge of the procedure was, and we stood on the right side of it. I didn't close the file. I went down to deep archive instead, past the floors where the working registry lived, into the original record halls where the index kept the charter documents nobody consulted anymore. The founding instruments, 200 years old, written before threat tier was even the name of the scale. The hall smelled of preservation gas and cold stone, the quiet of a place almost no one had reason to disturb. I wanted to know who had opened a file on Sol-designated space in the first place, and why, if the species was this resistant to measurement, anyone had bothered. The founding charter answered a question I hadn't known to ask. The Sol entry wasn't the 11,400 and first file opened. It was the first file, full stop, logged 4 years before the index itself existed as an institution, back when it was 3 founding species arguing over how to build a scale that could compare a plague world's bioweapon yield to a fleet's gun count to a culture's sheer unwillingness to stop fighting once provoked. The original charter draft proposed a 0 point, a known quantity, extreme enough in enough directions, that every other species could be measured as a distance from it. The species they chose as the 0 point was Earth's. Not because anyone had rated it existential. Because the 3 founders, comparing notes from 3 separate first encounters, none of them survived without losses they didn't expect, had each independently proposed humanity as the fixed reference. The species whose capacity to escalate, endure, adapt, and simply refuse to be finished was treated as a kind of physical constant, the way you'd anchor a measuring scale to the freezing point of a known substance rather than guess at a number. The whole threat tier scale, every rating in 11,400 files, was calibrated as a distance from a point that was never supposed to need a rating of its own. You don't measure the ruler against itself. That was the missing variable, not that the index had failed to study humanity closely enough. That the index, in every sense that mattered, was built out of them. Every later survey ship sent towards Sol-designated space wasn't gathering new data. It was attempting to measure the 0 against the scale it had generated, and the boundary kept returning the instruction politely, patiently, the same way you'd hand a measuring stick back to someone trying to measure it against itself. Wrong tool, wrong question, try again somewhere it matters. I sat with the charter page open a long time. 41 packets of contact that wasn't contact. 3 founders who never wrote down what they'd seen, only the conclusion it left them with. A field that didn't refuse data, it refused to be a field, because the thing inside it was never meant to be a line item. I logged my finding the only way the system allowed. Audit closed. Recommend permanent classification. Reference constant, non-rateable by design. Field locked, not blank. I did not write down the rest of what I understood because there was no field for it, and because some of what a person learns down in the deep archive is not improved by being said aloud in a report 100 other clerks will read. I requested transfer off boundary work the same afternoon, before the recommendation had even cleared review. Senior Clerk Dossandry signed it without a word, the way you sign something you've been waiting 2 centuries to stop having to ask for. 3 nights later, training the cadet who replaced me, I watched her pull up the Sol file out of simple curiosity, the way I had. She scrolled past the forward annotation, past the 41 packets, and her hand hovered over the rating field the same way mine had, testing it, the way you press a bruise to see if it still hurts. I didn't tell her the survey histories or the founding charter or the listening post that came home carrying corrections it had no right to make. I told her what Dasandri had told me, because it was the only true thing that fit in one sentence and didn't need a field of its own. Don't force that one, I said. It isn't waiting to be measured. It's the thing everything else gets measured against. She closed the terminal without asking why. Good instinct. The index has run for 2 centuries on clerks who knew, without ever being told the full charter, exactly which file not to touch, and the file has sat there the whole time, unresolved and unbothered, the one entry in 11,400 that the galaxy's own measuring stick was never built to reach.